my husband that I was seeing someone else. He thinks he's justified to ruin my life. My mom just ruined my whole life. She told my husband I was seeing someone else. Now my husband thinks he's justified to ruin my life. He ruined my life and he thinks it's right. This all happened because of my mother. If only she hadn't ran her mouth like a tap, my life wouldn't have been ruined. She caused all of it all because she wanted a piece of my husband. Now, whose mother in the whole damn wide world wants to sleep with their daughter's husband? I know there are a lot of mothers that could do that, so no need to answer that. But can you imagine her audacity? The buxom, blotched witch told my husband I was seeing someone else because she thought that would get her a chance with my husband. And for those of y'all that would come for me in the comments asking why I was seeing someone else when I was married, I would advise you to shut it. If I was seeing someone else while I was married to my husband, did that give him the justification to carry out revenge in such a manner? He was actually the whole cause of it. Okay, my tattletale of a mother was the cause of it, but my husband had been the one to initiate the events that led to me seeing someone else. Before we got married, my husband had told me that he just wanted us to be married for just about 2 years so he could inherit his father's property. I had agreed because he had promised me a fair compensation and then anything I needed. That day had looked like a dream come through to me. I mean, who offered to give you about $50,000 just to pretend to be married to him for 2 years? These were the stuff we read in romance novels that had made us swoon and sigh, and it was finally happening to me in real life. Of course, I was going to grab the opportunity. I just didn't know the opportunity would cost an arm and a leg and my whole internal body organs before it came to an end. Lol, I'm kidding, there was no loss of any body organs. But there was mental depression from terrible ruination that my husband kickstarted in my life. All because I saw someone else during our marriage. He thought he was justified to ruin my life. Let me tell you all how the ruination my husband set for me started. My name is Mika and I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Darren and he is 30 years old. How I met my husband? Well, I was working as an on-the-field realtor. Yeah, that meant I got to show people the properties they wanted to acquire. I was still starting up in the real estate agency, so the higher-ups gave me their hectic chores to do and stuff. On one of the occasions of showing prospective buyers some property, that's how I met my husband. Yeah, he was one of the prospective buyers. We hit it off as cool friends, and one day he invited me for their family dinner party, and that's when I knew the guy was loaded. Apparently, he didn't want to stay in their huge family mansion anymore because they were pressuring him to get married. My own mother couldn't care what I did with my life so far as I dropped her monthly mother's allowance for raising me. She had no qualms with me getting married or having children. After all, she had been married 5 times, and none of them favored her, so she wasn't going to push me. Those had been her words, not mine. Back to what I was saying. So my husband took me for dinner with his family, and his parents absolutely loved me. I am a lovely person, so that was expected. What I didn't expect was 2 weeks after the dinner, my husband sent for a car to bring me to his office and asked me to marry him there and then. Yeah, there was no romantic candlelit dinner with a "Will you marry me" sign on the wall. It was just pump and plain with my husband. When he had told me just like that, I had thought him mad and almost stomped out of his office. But then he started rolling out the benefits of getting married to him for just 2 years, and I was hooked. Like I said earlier, it was like it had been something from a romance novel you couldn't put down. After he listed out the compensation I would be getting from marrying him, I didn't even waste any time, and I said yes. I accepted the deal. It was a sweet, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it definitely cost me a great deal later on. Our wedding was a blur. His parents had been happy that their son was getting married. As for my mom, the only family I had, she couldn't even be bothered to show up that day. Well, my husband and I got married and we began living our lives. All these took place within the space of 2 weeks. I kid you not. We started living with each other without knowing anything about each other. So we were bound to quarrel, and I shouldn't have been surprised when the hostility started building up. I wouldn't say I resented him, but we just didn't fit. Apart from that, it was like he had no emotions. Like he couldn't be bothered to even talk to me or find out that I was still existing. It had been exhausting, but I was getting paid for being married to him, and he bought me expensive items. Maybe so I wouldn't change my mind or something. But then the experience became too hellish for me, and he hadn't specified what we were to do while we were married. I had endured for 1 year and 3 months, and I had just decided to step out a little LOL. My big mistake had been telling my mother. It hadn't been like I had told her, but she had caught me and I had to explain. That had been my biggest mistake. If not, my husband wouldn't have caught me. After about a year and 3 months of being faithful to a husband who hadn't seemed to care about me except throwing gifts in my way whenever I grumbled too much, I decided to live a nonchalant life. There had been no conditions when we had agreed to get married, so I thought to myself that there would be no issue if I dabbled around, and besides, he wouldn't catch me. He was always on trips. I was still contemplating taking the step to dabble in extramarital affairs. I hadn't wanted to be that girl. I hadn't wanted to be my mom. Then I had to go and bump into the only man I had ever loved at a coffee shop, and all thoughts of not cheating on my husband vanished from my head. He didn't care about me, and he could very well have been cheating on me with whomever when he was on his work trips. Besides, as I said before, he hadn't said anything about having sex outside our marriage. I mean, I could do what I wanted. Anyway, I bumped into someone I had always seen myself marrying, and the experience from then on till I was tattled out was amazing. He treated me like how you treat Queen Elizabeth when she comes to visit. Of course, he didn't know I was married, LOL, but I never planned on telling him. He had just made money and was glad that he found me again. Our story had ended quite quickly because he had gone to serve in the military, and I couldn't commit to a relationship where I didn't know if he was going to end up dead or alive each time he got deployed. But when I bumped into him at the coffee shop, he had served in the military and was now working in a classified position. I couldn't believe he had somehow made his way back into my life, and I had a husband who didn't give two shits about me. So don't blame me because I went straight into the man's arms that gave good dick and treated me like I was an egg. Everything was great. My husband was unaware and ignorant and so focused on his business while I was enjoying the attention of another man. I thought he was never going to find out. I even thought that if he found out, he wasn't going to do anything about it as long as our arrangement wasn't compromised. Yeah, delusional, right? My husband should have never been justified to ruin my life because I was sleeping with another man. He should never have even found out if it weren't for my mother. Now that I think about it, I hate that woman with my soul. She brought about all this. One fateful day when my husband was on a business trip. My lover had brought me home. I told him the house belonged to my late dad, and behold, my mother was standing at my front door, eyeing me wearily. I was so tongue-tied because before that day, I hadn't seen her in over a year, and she just showed up to my door late at night. She had asked me who was the man I was with, and I knew for sure she was going to call me out that I was a married woman, and except she had gone blind, the fella I was with didn't look anything like my husband. I thought for certain that was what was going to happen, but she shocked me again. My lover got the cue that she was my mother, we look alike, and greeted her and began confessing that I was the love of his life. Gag! My mother had just nodded her head and ordered me to open the door. Of course I did immediately, but my hands were shaking, thinking my moment of retribution was coming before my lover could leave. But nothing strange happened. My mother just stepped into my house and went straight to bed in the guest bedroom. The sigh of relief that had left me at that moment was loud, but I hadn't known my moment of retribution was stacking up. My mother began staying with us, so I couldn't comfortably sneak out to go see my lover, and then my husband came back from his trip. I started working on eggshells around them, and my lover had to become too demanding. Usually after work, I would go spend the rest of the day with him till late evening or even the next morning. But with my mother living with me and my husband back from his trip, everywhere had been so tight. My lover started showing up at my workplace and had the audacity to show up at my house. I regretted giving my house address or showing him where I lived at that instance. Luckily, my husband had been away that day, but my mother had been watching once again. Well, I had managed to dodge that bullet by telling my lover that I could only come to see him and not the other way round. I lied that my father was back at the mansion and he would shoot his head if he saw him. Which was half the truth, lol. My husband, not my father, was going to have his head if he saw him. I knew that for sure. Like I said, I had managed to prevent my lover and my husband from running into each other. I hadn't known my mom was going to be the trap that had been sent from hell. Apparently, she had the hots for my husband. Why would my mother have the hots for my husband, whom she was almost older than by 2 decades? And it's not like I hadn't seen the signs. I had seen the signs, but I had thought I was just reading meaning into things. In my head, I was like, there was no way my mother would have those types of feelings for my husband. But then my husband began to complain that my mother gave him weird vibes. According to him, he would be coming out of the shower and he would find my mother in the room under the pretense that she was looking for me or looking for something. All that started as she came to visit, but before that, she would ask me weird questions like how good my husband was in bed and if he had a huge tool. Completely weird stuff that I shouldn't have overlooked, but I had thought she was my mother, and as I didn't have any sister, it was normal to divulge this information. Big mistake. She wanted a piece of him, and my husband told me I needed to get her out of his house before he did something worse. And I knew my husband, y'all, he was going to make good on his threat. So I totally forgot she had caught me with someone that wasn't my husband in my matrimonial home. And I made another big mistake. I kicked her out. Yes, I threw my mother out of the house and she decided to pay back big time. I hadn't expected it. Before my mother tattletaled on me, I had broken things up with my lover. Actually, he had been the one to break things up with me. LOL. He had said he wanted someone more present in our relationship, and I was like, good riddance. Our dynamic hadn't been as good as back then, and I was a married woman. My husband was more present than before, and I didn't want to have an affair. I didn't have the strength, quite frankly. It was like my husband was finally seeing me for who I was, the person he had married. I know I had blamed him earlier for not being present, but he became more caring as time went on. This was after I had kicked my mother out of our house. Maybe it was because our contract was almost up, or I don't know what inspired his change of heart. But I guess I can say I had fallen in love with my husband at that moment before the fire lit up, and he felt justified to ruin my life. He picked me up after work, got me my favorite treats, took me to see my favorite games. I couldn't believe it, and I know you're hoping the guilt of me having an affair must have been eating me up then. But it was not. What if he had only been acting nice to make up for the atrocity he had committed? It was quite possible, but I never got to find out if he was genuine or not because the fire happened soon right after. Give or take, my mom came back 3 weeks later to enact her revenge. Here's how the beginning of my problem happened. My husband got back from work on an evening. I was already home from work, so I had prepped his meal and, everything that would make him happy, because I thought all was well and we were finally moving into the happy couple stage that could stand each other's presence. I didn't know I was in trouble, and all was anything but well. My husband had banged the door to announce his presence, and I knew something was up then, but I had thought it was work-related. Before I blinked my eyes and opened them, my husband stood in front of me and slammed some pictures down on the seat where I occupied. You guys, the pictures were of me and my affair. I was shocked and couldn't speak until my husband spoke up and told me that my mother had personally delivered these pictures to his office. How she had gotten the pictures? I had no idea, but that night my husband tore into me like never before. According to him, he hadn't wanted to believe my mother when she came to him with talks that I was having an affair and was going to call the police on her when she produced evidence to her claim that I was indeed seeing someone outside our marriage. He called me all sorts of names. Stupid was one of the recurring ones. I just had one job, in his own words, to stay married to him for 2 years to get his inheritance, to keep myself in check. What if my mother had gone to his parents with evidence of me cheating, then he would have lost his inheritance? What if some paparazzi had caught it or something had happened that had exposed me having an affair and led people to prod and find out our marriage was arranged? Had I told my mother our marriage was a sham? Why couldn't I hold off the affair a little longer then? In the next 7 months we'll be done. My dears, these and many more had been the questions my husband had hammered into me that night. But of course, I hope you didn't expect me to keep quiet as he was trying to make me feel small. I reciprocated his energy. I told him when we had gotten married, he hadn't made any stipulations on extramarital affairs clear, and he was always gone so much. How was I supposed to be sure that he wasn't cheating on me? He called me stupid again at that point and couldn't believe he had actually gotten married to me. Well, that night he threw me out of his house. I didn't speak to my husband for about 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks I had the worst news, guys. I found out that I was pregnant. Yeah, the same question of if it was for my husband or for my affair. Trust me, I wondered that too. But when I had gone to the OBGYN, I found out I was just 3 weeks along then. So it was my husband's. The problem was how I was going to tell him I was carrying his child. Our contract still had about 6 months left, and with the way he wasn't talking to me, I had feared that he was going to call it off and not compensate me again. That's what I had feared. What I hadn't known was how he was going to turn everything around and ruin me completely. After 2 weeks of not seeing my husband and wondering what was going to happen, My husband barged into the hotel room I was staying temporarily and flung divorce papers in my face. How he had known where I was staying, I didn't know once again. He had flung the divorce papers in my face and said our sham was up. My mother, the tattletale, had gone to his parents and told them that I had an affair while being married to their son. His parents had then done some digging around and found out that we had signed an agreement contract before getting married. As punishment, my husband wasn't going to get his inheritance for another 3 years. With that news, I couldn't even bring myself to tell him that I was pregnant. So I wasn't going to get any compensation, and he had seized everything he had ever gotten me as gifts. I had thought he would end there. Why had my husband felt justified to ruin my life when I hadn't been the one to bring about the cause of his problems directly? Shouldn't he have targeted my mother, who had caused all our problems? But he didn't target my mother. He targeted me. Fast forward 3 months later, I was doing well in my work with my baby bump not showing, but that was beside the point. Tell me why my husband hadn't moved on. He bought the agency where I worked, and when he had been announced as the new boss, I had thought I would faint. I was hiding his child from him, so of course I was scared. Do you want to know what my husband did as he took over my company? He fired me, right then and there when I hadn't even done anything. My husband fired me from my workplace. It had been so unexpected because I just finished using my last salary to rent a house. I didn't have any savings. I had nothing to my name because he had already taken everything from me. Well, I had left the agency with my tail between my legs. I got a job at a bakery 2 weeks later and was packing up shifts to be able to cater for myself and save up to have my baby. My ex-husband walked into the bakery 3 weeks later and caused a scene saying there was a spider leg in his croissant and that he was going to bring the bakery down if the baker responsible wasn't fired. I was the baker on duty that morning. That was how he got me fired. He continued like that. Any job I managed to get, he would somehow get me fired or make the owner to not want me to work for them anymore. It has been madness, and for what reason? Was it because I had agreed to his stupid contract? I wished I never did. I was stressed looking for how to fend for myself and the baby growing in my tummy, and he had just been messing my efforts. I lost my baby. Yeah, you read right. I couldn't cope with the stress, and one day I just slumped and was rushed to the hospital. The doctor told me I had lost my baby and I needed to take it easy as my blood pressure could make me have a heart attack. I decided to cook down, but then my husband continued to make life difficult. I couldn't get a job because my previous experiences showed I was fired within 2 weeks or a month. And it was true. It was like my ex-husband was monitoring me, and whenever I landed a job, he came in to make my life miserable. I had finally had it up to my neck and marched down to his office. Coupled with the frustration of losing my baby and not being able to eat properly or rest, I laid him one. Do you know what he said after I was done? Nothing. He said absolutely nothing and was unbothered. I told him I was just lost our baby and he hadn't even flinched. He hadn't cared about me. He had just cared about his inheritance. I was just a means to an end. I couldn't believe I had seen myself falling for that psychopath one bit. In his own words, I had prevented him from achieving his inheritance when he wanted it. So he felt justified to ruin my life. According to him, it was enough to see that I suffered the rest of my life, and that was what he was going to keep doing. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave the city. I had no other family, and my ex-husband was going to keep it making me miserable. Fuck, he hadn't even cared that I had lost a part of me. How had I agreed to live with such a human? Well, I had learnt my lesson. He made my life terrible and made me lose a baby and felt it was worth it just because I had made him lose his inheritance. He was still going to get back within 3 years. I learnt my lesson, Redditors. I hope you learned from my experience too.